Hello, and we are back continuing our discussion of Chapter 4, and we're talking about limitations of plant-wide rates and departmental rates. So we've kind of talked a little bit about how you can have different products and different departments, and they're going to use resources differently, right? So you might want to break your book out because we're kind of going to follow along through a couple of scenarios that are outlined in the book. It might be easier for you to follow there, or just go read it. So in this imaginary scenario, we have two departments. They're called the molding department and the assembly department. So they're making these toys, and they mold them, and then they put them together. They make two kinds of toys, race cars and robots, and they use resources differently. We make 5 times more race cars than robots, so we got this high volume versus low volume. That can use up resources very differently. Molds for robots are larger and more varied, so there, difference in resources. And we've got 4 types of overhead activities: setups, machining, inspection, and moving batches. So how does this work if we just lumped it all together plant-wide? That doesn't seem fair. Maybe if something's volume driven, it'll be unfair to robots, whereas if something is driven by machining and inspection and moving batches, where you've got those varied and large molds, maybe robots cost more. So we need to think about what we're going to do here, right? So if you look, you'll see they're very different, right? So here's the activities. So prime costs we're not going to worry too much about, because quite frankly, we can trace our direct labor and our direct materials. What we're really concerned with in terms of overhead is, how does the volume affect things like machine hours? How does the molds affect things like setups and inspections? Just what's the difference? Is one very labor intensive, one not? So we look at our activity usage. So you can see robots, less direct labor, but more machine hours, fewer setups, fewer inspections, fewer moves, right? So if we were just to total it all and divide it, that's maybe not a very fair way of assigning costs. So if you were the person in charge of maybe making profits off robots or profits off race cars, right? You're the manager of that line of products. Getting the costing of the overhead wrong might make your product look unprofitable if you're getting unfair overhead assigned. So we want to keep this overhead right, and plus you just don't know. Suppose somebody called in a special order, want a special custom race car with our company logo on it to give out at a company party. How would you know how to cost it? All right, so there's 2 different departments. We got 2 products, 2 departments, and here's how they expend the resources, right? So you've got molding and assembly with labor hour. Look at that difference between race cars in terms of assembly and robots. So robots 5,000 assembly, race cars 35,000, but molding is about the same. So you can see we're getting quite some various changes. Machine hours, robots a lot more versus race cars, not that many, and molding. So you can tell there's going to be some distinct differences if you base your overhead on how the resources are used or the activities that are going on here. All right. So let's just take our example all the way through. If we use a plant-wide rate, in other words, we just add all the overhead and divide it by labor hours, something like that. Prime cost is, obviously we can trace that, direct materials, direct labor, $4 and $3. Overhead ends up being $1.40 and $1.12, and unit cost $5.40, $4.12. Now, if we go break that down to overhead by departments, right, where the resources are used very differently for these 2 products, you end up with robots having overhead cost of $4.50 and race cars have an overhead cost of 50 cents. That's a huge difference. Changing this from $8.50 to $3.50. So you can see that one overhead rate for a company-wide is not going to get us a very good idea of what the costs are. All right, so the main problem, and obviously, even if you're doing department rates, right, you could still have a big difference in volumes and things that are going to still be problematic, right? So if a plant-wide rate gets used in our example, the race cars are getting a lot more overhead, and that might not be reasonable. All right, so if you look over, it's you might realize a big part of the overhead isn't caused by units produced, right? The number of units, this high volume, makes a big difference. It cuts the prices, the costs a lot more. So using labor hours gives 4 times more overhead to the race cars than to the robots. So just if we stop and we don't, not saying those are bad, not saying we would never use plant-wide or departmental rates. Sometimes they're appropriate. But a lot of people think breaking out the activities and making one big, instead of having one big pool, you break out every activity, add them all up, and come up with your units based on the different various activities. So let's join our next video and start talking about ABC.